Well, good late afternoon. The sun's out when it's 6 o'clock. It's awesome. So good late afternoon. This is the meeting of the Growth Planning Committee for April 2nd. And as always, we'll start off with introductions, starting to the left.
James McMahon.
Jane is coming.
Dan Saunders, Chair.
Liz Johnson.
Mary Beth Gilbert.
And Galen Webley, Director of Planning and Development.
Okay.
And Paul Hogan remotes.
All right, Paul.
Just in time to introduce you.
And to my left.
Jane Evelyn.
There we go. Thanks. Okay, so we don't have any guests here, but I'm sure we got many on virtually. So thank you for joining us. Second thing on the agenda is the approval of minutes from our previous meeting. So I'll take a motion.
Make a motion to approve them.
My second.
A second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, excellent. Unanimous, everybody. So thank you very much, Liz. All right, third thing, and really the big thing on our agenda is the growth area maps. And for that, I will turn it over to the star of our show there to the left, to the right.
So give me a few seconds to
Absolutely.
see about getting into the server.
Absolutely.
Getting into the server.
You should just be able to present.
But it's not updating my maps. Because it's on the server.
You have to VPN in
Yeah.
for that? Okay.
I will say, in the meantime, we did receive some information from Barbara Ripton. So appreciate you sharing the recommended tree list. And understanding is this is from what Portland uses, and we will be using that as our basis for our tree list. So thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to try to share my screen here. And we'll see if this fixes itself. I had a bunch of buffers and this all planned out for you. But it's looking like it wants to freeze. Let's see here. Share screen.
Was that sent through email to us too?
No, it's on it's on our server.
Okay, all right, okay. I wasn't sure if you, okay, thank you.
I think it's shared. Is it sharing?
I can see it.
Oh, ours
Oh, excellent.
still shows the view of that.
You want to share it, Paul?
There it is.
There it is.
Okay, so this is your various zones, and again, this is all, it's not updating right now. I might have to restart it again. But I did do a breakdown of the different growth map areas and as well as your buffers for different things. And so there's a 1,000-foot buffer, and we use the hydrants, which are right here, the circular ones. So that's your water lines. You know, they obviously have to be hooked up. I do not have any GIS data on the water lines in general. I just have the hydrant data. Okay. So that's what we have to work with. You asked for me to look at this and try to layer it over our zoning and then show where our existing sewer line buffers are and try to figure out, okay, where do you want to move this to? So let me try to reset this again and see if it will come up with no issue. Don't know why that's doing that. Because that wasn't even colored. Technology screen works.
It may just be too data intensive to do over the internet.
Right.
You might need to be on the local network at town hall.
So, let's see if we can do this. Okay. Zoom. Okay, that's better. So what you have here is the general layer of the growth map areas and then your zones. How I did the texturing to make it understandable is your hash marks that go down the slanted, that's your growth area. Your zones are outlined, FE, free enterprise, VRZ, the village residential zone. So they're all abbreviated, but they're in your land use code. I can certainly zoom in closer for folks. Once you go up towards Goose Rock's beach zone, you'll see that the layer will start to change,
Or not?
maybe.
I can't see.
There you go. So you'll see that it starts to change into that sort of polka dot type texture. So that's your transition zone.
Okay.
So you can see that your growth area goes into multiple zones and it sort of breaks up zones. That's not normally the case, but it'll become apparent when you see things with the buffers that we overlaid over top of it. So, and then anything else that doesn't have a texture is your rural area. So I didn't think you were looking at changing any of those.
So when we see the texture over the green rural, what is that, Galen?
So the texture, that is the transition zone. That's the transition area in your growth maps.
Okay, so even though it's the background green, it's,
Yep.
okay. so
Yep,
it's
that's
still
farm and
changing.
forestry. So there's a part of it that's in the transition and there's part of it that's not.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
And what's the definition of transition again?
I have to get that for you.
Well, the meaningful part is the number of growth permits you can get.
Okay.
Yeah, it's supposed to be, you're supposed to be looking out for critical natural resources.
Yeah.
So you're not supposed to have heavy, intense development. It's supposed to be a little bit less as intense. And then as you keep going away from your growth area, it's supposed to be more sparsely populated.
So pink, is, oh, sorry. Is pink right on that map, is the red, that's the growth area? Green is, the transition, and the yellow up is rural?
So the colors are representing your zones.
Zone.
Okay,
And so the texture is representing your growth areas, which sometimes go through multiple zones, as you can see. It just
The
goes.
green is farm and forestry, and the pink is what?
Pink is that free enterprise, I believe? Yeah, FE is free enterprise. GR is Goose Rock's zone.
okay, it's updating, that's,
Yep.
I see where Goose Rock
Yeah.
Beach is now. I'm looking at it the wrong way. I was looking at it as it was going up towards Log Cabin Road. I'm completely looking at it the wrong way.
Yep,
Okay, so blue is Goose Rock Beach.
yep. It has it abbreviated there, the GR, the FE.
Yeah, I can't see that far.
Yeah. So that, I know you were wanting to focus on the growth area, so I'll move down that direction.
Yep.
And while I do that and it loads, I wanted to also let you know that I did send a memo to the town select board for their guidance and insight, and I also sent it to the planning board. Planning board will give me their feedbacks tomorrow night that we can then give to the select board. Select board will ultimately give you the decision on guidance on what they want you to tackle for 2024. Until they make that guidance, I thought tonight we would just do the exercise of what you guys wanted to look at for research-wise for the growth area. And so with the growth area, you can see the hash marks now. It's at a 45-degree angle. Those are all the zones that are encompassed in this. So it's the free enterprise, the village residential, Dock Square, the riverfront zone, the village residential east area. There's the Cape Porpoise West area, Cape Porpoise East, part of Cape Porpoise East area, and Cape Porpoise South. And then Cape Arundel at the very bottom. So those are your zones that are encompassed in your growth area. What I'll do is I'll turn on, this is the 1,000-foot buffer that I was mentioning. That's the rationalization that you all have used for creating your growth area is based off the 1,000-foot buffer. And so if I add that buffer, it should pop up at some point to give you a picture of where it's all encompassing. I'll also add your hydrants to it. These are each 1,000 foot. It wants to load. Next time I'll just do screenshots.
Yeah.
Hey, just to help me locate things, oh, okay. I was wondering what those big parcels were in the growth area, if anybody. Parcels without streets, where they were located.
Without what?
Street.
Without streets, in your last iteration, there were a couple of big areas. I was just trying to figure out what they were in relation to.
Is village parcel one of those, Paul?
It could have been.
Okay.
Didn't look like the shape of it, but I could be wrong.
Okay.
But I can't see it on this screen
Yeah.
because it's.
Right. Well,
It is,
You gotta put this in the cloud, my man.
I know.
I'm surprised it's not.
is this something you can send to us?
I can do PowerPoint screenshots for you, because you don't have GIS access to it, so I'd have to create PDFs of individual areas to show you roughly. This is where we're talking about. Sorry about that, thought this would work.
Right, now we're really just concerned with the growth area.
Right, that's what you guys were
Right.
giving me direction on what you want to do.
And more so about where are the hazardous areas, the areas of risk for flooding, et cetera, that are within the growth area, which we don't want to drive growth into if we're gonna have flood issues.
Yep. So, hold on.
Right, so who's gonna identify those?
We have that available to you. Let me see if I can use the other GIS for you to at least give you an idea. This might work a little bit better. I won't be able to do the buffering for the hydrants or the sewer because it's not on here. But this will give you an idea. We already know where the growth map area is. And Paul, feel free to ask questions about where things are located. I'm going to share my screen again. Third time's a charm. Okay, do we all see this?
Yep.
This is on the city's GIS. You see this is the growth area. I can turn on the zoning map, but just for our intents and purposes, you wanted to ask about the flood maps. And since we know that the 2023 flood map revisions that were made are going to be taking effect, I can put that layer in for you to show you this is the outline of where that is. So I don't know where you want me to zoom in at first. That's
What's that big parcel that you
this one
had
right
your?
here.
Yeah.
It's 39 Rocky Pasture Lane.
Are you referring to the open space?
Yeah.
This one.
Yes.
Here. Yep.
Yeah, the one without streets.
Yep.
A couple big, huge areas.
Yep.
Is that across from the elementary school?
No, isn't that where Patrick Dempsey lives?
Really?
Yeah.
It's near.
Where's that?
That's his little parcel?
Oh, yeah, his little
It's
parcel.
near Washburn Drive, if that helps for.
Oh, okay. The new reference is the man's name.
That's how they do it in the fire
Oh,
department. It's over by Sam's house. Great.
yeah, Rocky Pasture Drive goes on Wilds District Road.
Yeah,
Okay,
Yep.
yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
That's that lot.
big spot.
So that's all in growth area?
That's all in the growth area.
Wait, which is that like okay, it's actually,
Private.
try to orientate where that
Yeah,
water inlet is compared to the street. Is that street up on the top?
Yeah, right here. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the street that Mr. Dempsey,
Well, there's a
With-
bunch of houses back there
What's between Wilds District and Ocean Ave?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So where, how do we see the areas that, I don't see the flood thing on there.
The green?
He just put it on, I think.
So right there's the pink. Some of it's yellow, so you're not gonna be able to see the contrast, but that's.
Okay.
That is, part of the flooding area. That's, I believe, a 500-year
Okay.
is the yellow.
The yellow is
Yep.
flood?
100-year is your pink that you see right here,
Okay.
where it floods.
It's everywhere.
And the darker,
Green is
Purple.
your coastal velocity zone, so that's where, again, the tides play an important factor in the flooding of those areas.
Yeah.
So that's the ocean, that's the flooding,
Yep.
and then the yellow is on the coast is a 500-year
Yes, yeah.
flood. Okay, so, okay. All right. And the pink, purple is
100-year.
100-year.
Yep.
Probably low-lying areas, yeah, I see, yeah.
Pink over on the far left, what street is that? Is that River
Right here?
Road?
That's
Probably Ducks Square.
Ocean Avenue, isn't it?
Ocean Ave, yep.
Yeah, it's by the Dock Square area.
Can you show us,
By Chicks Marina.
can you show us down what the port itself looks like on this, with the colors?
Port, which,
Dock
The
Square.
Dock
Dock
Square.
Sorry.
right here. Yep.
Oh,
So that's sea level.
That's at sea level. I believe I can put the contours on for you if that helps. I think they're maybe at 4 feet or 8 feet when we looked at this last. Yeah, there's 6 feet, 2 feet elevations right through here, 8 feet right here.
Because, I mean, Dock Square flooded,
Yep,
but it doesn't, it's not pink there.
that's pink,
it, yeah,
right?
Oh, down the road a little bit, yeah.
it doesn't go, once it goes up the hill, it's not.
But the houses,
Okay.
so the ones that have been getting flooded on Dock Square, do those really show up here as being, it's hard for, I think it's just hard to see that,
Yeah.
if it's pink or if it's normal.
Let me see if I can put a base layer on if that helps. This is your 2022 map.
Yes, that circle area, or that's that water inlet area that where the water comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's hard to see anything.
Does that help?
Oh,
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
So the dark purple is like the river,
Yeah.
right?
and then you can see it flooding.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So Ben and Jerry's would be
It's on the hill.
up on the hill, but it looks like it's going up. Yeah, so there's the corner of this. Okay,
Ben and
so there's-
Jerry's is dry.
It looks like green.
It's
in the
dry,
green
but
area.
it's actually interesting because the parking lot across the street from Ben and Jerry's is under,
Yeah,
and then
Well, 'cause it's lower.
behind that is under too.
yeah.
Yeah, that's all, that place is all
So the-
flat. And so that represents an 8-foot surge, that purple?
Oh, no, that was the 8-foot elevation was where we were looking at. That was just the contour. That's how high it is currently at sea level.
Right, so that parking lot is 8 feet above. That seems like a lot. Doesn't seem like that's 8 feet above.
Which
High or low
This one?
tide? That, where, like, say that parking lot across from Ben and Jerry's.
1111-3, the block and lot.
That says it's at. Zoom in closer. That's 6 feet right here.
Okay, that's not high at all.
But the
like to see my
purple, just for clarification, the purple means it's within what?
It's a 100-year flood.
It's a
So if a 100-year flood were to occur, that's where it's going to go.
The light purple.
Right.
Yeah, this.
And a 100-year flood is a 1% chance it's gonna happen every year.
Right. Which it can be more than that.
Right.
You know, that's just what they
1%. And
estimate.
a 500-year flood's a 0.2% chance it will happen every year.
Right.
So how do we delineate what happens, like, what happened in a normal, super saturated rainy season, what happens during the January 13th, storm during extremely high tide, astronomically high tide, and the 100-year map, because we actually, we could draw into that color purple right now where we know
Things got flooded.
things are flooded.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that January storm was higher than 100-year.
Oh, really?
That was, I think, a lot larger than that. I don't remember what year it was, but it wasn't 100.
You mean it was like,
I think it was
80.
something more rare that didn't.
oh, more red?
Yeah,
Yeah, it was the
Yeah, but we got
perfect.
2 within 3 weeks,
right.
Yeah.
Yep.
so maybe it's not so rare anymore.
No.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
I think the other thing too is that we're continuing, since last summer, we're been saturated,
Mm-hmm.
and,
Yeah. Ground.
The
just can't
ground
hold
is-
it.
yeah.
Yeah, it was warm. It was the astronomical high tide. It was the perfect.
But then as you get out of Dock Square going towards the ocean, it's all green.
It's a higher elevation.
Yeah, some of them, they built some of them on the sand dunes, so it's higher. You'll see it actually at Goose Rocks Beach. If you ever, again, this is a public survey, you can go over there and check it out. There are certain houses where you can see the floodplain just goes all around it.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
There's so much more higher elevation on the dunes. So it's very interactive, and
So while you're scrolling down there, Ocean Ave is all within the
Yep.
Yeah.
floodplain.
Yep.
It's all within the floodplain.
Yeah, that's Chicks
Meaning-
Marina right there, which you pretty much can't drive from the Arundel Wharf all the way to the Colony,
But
So-
it's green.
because it's
isn't it?
underwater.
But it's green on the map.
He just hasn't moved.
Yeah. So my question is, does anybody know if that area was it built on a marsh? Like that low-lying area where Chicks Marina is? Was that built? Was it filled in or built? Does anybody know that?
Probably.
I think so.
Yeah,
If you look
That's
at
what they did then.
I bet.
old photos, it's kind of sand dunes there.
Yeah.
Now, that's, where are we right now? What's that right there?
That's the colony right at the bottom.
Colony.
Which
The-
Town Wharf.
The red roofs.
Government wharf,
Yeah.
Yep.
left of the yellow,
Left of the
Yeah.
yellow.
that's government wharf.
That's Government Wharf.
Oh, good. Higher tide, more slips we can rent out. Nothing.
Okay, so then,
Well, that's all high enough.
Yep.
so what beach is that, Colony Beach right there?
Mhm.
Yep.
Oh, that's not high enough. That's gone.
No, yeah, that's gone.
Huh, that's weird.
What do you mean gone?
It's gone.
Last year's storm took out, the parking lot, last year, not this past.
Is that with the jetty?
And then this past storm took
On-
out more,
The port side.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So Colony Beach, I don't think that's gonna open this summer for parking. Because the whole
Is
ocean
it-
just went right over the whole thing
Yeah.
and pushed it all into the,
The condos, are those condos or whatever there on the other side? Are they condos?
yeah, they're okay, I think.
No, but yeah, but that's that.
Yeah, where those blue
Yeah.
condos,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is Colony Beach still there physically, or it got completely washed out and the tide now goes to the rocks?
No, there's still, I think there's, when we looked at it, there was still a beach, it's just the parking area
Right.
that the
right.
town was going to, fix, got hit again. So now the question is, what do we, so that's the question in front of the town is, the study that has to be done about what has to be done to Colony Beach. What's the options?
6-inch riprap. Something bigger. If they're gonna use it as a public access.
Is that owned by the colony or is that town property?
It's town. So, so now we're going down Ocean Ave still, right?
Yep, we're on Ocean Ave, there's Central Ave.
Okay.
So this area is pretty much,
And that January 11th storm is the one that took that out?
Last year, the big storm took the parking lot, and then in the town, we had talked about, I think, like a $40,000 thing to repair the parking lot.
Yeah.
And then that didn't get done. And then the January 13th storm came, and then that took out, water came further in.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because the parking lot wasn't there, it was just because the water came.
Yeah,
so much
yeah, it's
further
just a
in.
part of the ocean. There's nothing to stop those waves from coming in. It's
Yeah.
just, it's open ocean.
Yeah.
It's gonna happen.
Yeah. So the other thing that's not here is, again, you have to remember when we started talking about this, we had, the select board had newly come off of our trip that we went around after the January 13th storm and saw the town. And one of the parts was the area behind, because remember, the January 13th storm, or the first storm, or whatever it was, proceeded with rain. So we had the rain before the storm. So we actually had all that rain that was super saturating, and then we had the storm on top of that. So behind Colony, the house is up back there, the terrain, there's a hill. And what Chief Sanford was showing us was the fire hydrants when the crews were going through there, the fire hydrants that were literally underwater because of the water. It wasn't from the water coming up from the harbor, it was from the water coming down off the hill. So there are, I guess my question or point is, would we ask Galen to work with Chris and maybe the two chiefs to identify some areas in town that have water runoff issues that are flooding? Because if we're saying, I think that was one of my concerns, if we start paving over more and taking over areas that will saturate, that will help runoff, what areas are we have the probability to increase? And I don't look at it in just the way of how LD 2003 is written. I think the way I'm looking at it is, now we know this growth map is being used for different things, and would it be prudent for us at this point to look at it that way and then determine, make a recommendation on, these are areas that saturate within our town, and maybe we shouldn't be adding any more non-pervious surfaces to them.
Is it private property?
Yeah, but the roads, what it showed is you have houses built up on a hill, and the water's running down.
Right.
And you have to remember that how the town was built, we don't have a lot of, just like down at the beach and other areas all around town, there's not really a lot of good drainage, natural drainage.
Right, so that's the question. Was it the natural contour where the water was building up, or was it on the street where the fire hydrant was? And what I mean by that, it was that because it was in January, was the drainage frozen where the water couldn't move fast enough? So it's finding other ways, and subsequently, where that fire hydrant was, it just pooled up and caused a problem.
No, this is an area in town that's known for issues with water.
Okay.
And so then the rain that never stopped on supersaturated ground just allowed it to run down. So Chris had showed us when we drove around in the bus, the areas on the side of the road that they tried to provide some drainage to go down, and it would naturally flow, hopefully down to the river area from that area. It had washed all that stuff out. So I think that's the thing is, if you look from my perspective, or one of my thoughts is, we're not going to go back through as a town and reorchestrate or redig up areas and make them more drainage friendly, because it would be our whole town. Our town was not built like that. So I think that's just maybe getting some advisement or some input from Chris and the people that know of areas, because this floodplain map is great, but it's from ocean in. It's not the actual workings of our town and how our town actually drains. Galen, when you've worked with other towns and stuff, and the water issues, because you were on a coastal town,
I never worked in a coastal town.
oh, you didn't?
No.
I,
Prescott, no, that's an inland. Yeah.
ah,
Yep.
okay, welcome to the coast.
Thank you. Yep.
So I didn't know if there was any, you know, when you're hearing us talk and stuff and you know what we want to get to, is there any guidance from your perspective of, what other things we should be looking for, or what other things towns have done?
Right. So I think you're looking at the stormwater. You know, how we're going to address new development moving forward. Certainly, Chris and Public Works are doing a lot with, you know, planning what stormwater looks like for the roads, because that's always going to be a ongoing struggle with putting in infrastructure necessary to mitigate any kind of damage to roads. So those are being looked at. I know he just got another culvert study recently as well that he's looking at for a part of town. So I think you're doing the prudent step of looking at this. Certainly, you know, taking a look at your growth maps. You know, it's good to look at it. I think we're if you look at some of these lots, they already have their single family dwelling on them, and they're already at that 40,000 square feet. They can't be developed again unless the town changes its policy and changes its density requirements. These small little lots right here are not going to be able to be built on, except maybe in an accessory dwelling, which again, state law, we have to allow. And we've already been in compliance for, I believe, a year or two now.
Right, so the case like that, I just want to point out, it's up to us to improve, like, if there's draws, that water can only go a certain way, and if they subsequently go down the road, we need to probably look at better drainage to help with that surge. The other thing to do is, maybe there's a regulation where the fire department gets about health, you know, life and safety, you know, making sure that fire hydrant can go higher. You know, I certainly wouldn't want it to be underwater where they couldn't use it.
Well, they would never get the trucks in there. They wouldn't take the truck in there.
Yeah, so in the case like this, it's a matter of improving the drainage.
I think.
I don't want, like, if nobody can improve, you know, their buildings or build them bigger or take away, then, you know, that's it seems like an exclusively a drainage issue that would need to be dealt with on the roads itself.
So I think what I'm trying to get at is that that's not there is no easy answer.
There's no easy answer for any of this.
And I think that's where, you know, if we're looking at the growth map and some areas, I think we would just want to get some guidance from Chris or, you know, Galen, about, you know, maybe this committee would want to get some guidance about some areas that are saturated or super saturated, or that we know we have drainage issues, because we're not going to address them. And so do we want, I guess, the question to the committee is, do you want them part of this map, or do you want to make the suggestion that?
Well, I think we'll take a step back. With the growth area, transitional area, and rural area, they were a broad brush, right? We just identified 3 areas. Growth was within 1,000 feet of the infrastructure, water, sewer. Then we identified what rural was, and everything left was transition. Right? So you ended up with these 3 huge broad brush areas. So that divvied up how we were going to do the permits and try to drive the growth towards where you had sewer and water. So we're not having to put in septic systems and all the rest that can have some bad long-term consequences. So, or you have to maintain them and so forth. A lot of folks don't do a good job of that. But that's all it does is offer you to get that growth permit. If you're gonna build something that's in a flood hazard area or a risk area, then there's a flood hazard or a flood permit you gotta get, right? Flood management permit. So the idea was that there were other mechanisms in town to sort of control. So if somebody walked in and said, hey, that's a nice big parcel there, I see it's pink, but we can get around that, right? And you're like, no, you can't. You can't put an affordable density there because that's a flood area, and there'd be other requirements that they would have to meet.
Yeah, and shoreline zoning too, also, if your parcel is large enough to locate the structure solely outside the shoreline zoning, you have to do it. There's no, oh, I want to,
Yeah.
like, you know, I want to keep it in. No, you have to get it out.
Yep.
We actually have a planning board application for site plan review for a garage, and it's down at Goose Rocks Beach, and it's, staff noticed that they can make it a little bit more conforming, and they decided to just table it for now, because they know they have to go back to the drawing board. So, shoreline zoning's already in, that's a state requirement that we have to follow, and it does limit where they can put this kind of development in our town, for sure.
And that's relevant to LD 2003 as well.
Yep.
Throw it.
Just
What
like
I don't
it-
know is about the floodplain management piece, I mean, and what puts that into? How do you know on a parcel whether that's considered to be having to be?
It's an
managed
art,
as a
it's an
flood?
art form, Dan.
Are you talking about like where the shoreline zoning buffer is?
Year flood that's in?
Nope, it includes wetlands that are connected to, any kind of tributary, if they have a stream, so if a wetland is connected to a stream that then goes into a tributary, that it has a shoreline zoning buffer to it. Coastal wetlands have a buffer to it. If there are two resources in one area, it's considered a resource protection area, which has more strict requirements on it. So it all depends on the parcel. And there's some wetlands that we just had a zoning board case before us, and they were arguing that they should not be able to fill in the wetland, and this wetland does not connect to a stream or it's not more than 2 acres, it's less than 2 acres, they can fill it in. So it all depends on where you're at.
can?
Yes. They have to get a DEP permit, it's a tier 1 review process. Yep.
Why doesn't that go against our comp plan under like the
Okay.
preserving environment and animal habitats and
Yep.
stuff like that?
That's, state allows for certain wetlands to be, you can be more restrictive.
It's probably a difference between private and,
Yeah,
town-held property.
not a vernal pool, if it's what all.
Yeah. So it all depends. It's
Right, but the basic form of shoreline zoning is if you own property, like within that shoreline zone, you can't put structures, you can't cut all the trees down,
Well,
you can't do
shoreline,
certain
yeah, I get
things.
that, but like, was this in the shoreline zone?
Yep.
Oh.
The shoreline zone extends inland.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
it is kind of a misnomer because shoreland also includes lakes, freshwater lakes.
Yeah, so it would be any water source.
It's a water body.
Not
Well, there's like the DEP, and back me up on this, like if you have like a stream or whatever, the DEP has to, like if we want to build something or whatever, the DEP has to sign off on that too, and that's 75 feet from whatever they designate.
Yeah, stream protection.
Yeah, it's a stream protection, so even if you're 3 miles in, if you have a stream going through or a draw, you can't build right next to that. There's still buffers for all that stuff. So, and what's the and what's the state, shoreline zoning? Wherever they designate back, what is it? Is it, what is it? Like, so for example, if you're on a marsh and they say, from this point right here, this is where the marsh starts, this is where your property starts, it goes back so many feet that you can't do anything in it. Do you know what that number is?
It all depends on what the classification of that wetland is.
Okay.
Streams at 75 feet generally.
Yeah.
However, if that stream goes,
But marshes and ocean,
connects to a river, then it's 250
right, so it's
from
250,
the high water line.
right, so the state is 250 feet. For example, like marshes and ocean,
It depends.
okay,
And what I will share with you also is we had this conversation at the last zoning board of appeals meeting. Our shoreline ordinance hasn't been updated since, I forget how long it's been. There's been classifications that we have in our shoreline ordinance that are outdated, such as the less than 2 acres requirement. They don't require that anymore in the definition, so we have to update that ordinance, which is also in your land use ordinance. It's, again, juggling what priorities you want to tackle. But you do have some restrictive language in your land use ordinance. So even if a wetland is filled in, it's still part of the net residential density, which in most towns, they don't count that, but we still do. Even though they filled it in, we still count that that was a wetland at one point, and that's part of your reduction in your net residential density. So it means you need more land in order to build another unit on that property.
And so are there, in the example you just gave, are there exemptions for like a working waterfront, for example?
Yep.
Where they can do that because they're lobstermen or whatever, and they're using that particular area to, make a living?
Dock Square and riverfront zones are considered general development districts. That is a shoreland zoning term that allows for basically working waterfront areas. And it's a zoning overlay to your shoreland zoning that basically gives a little bit more freedom to commercial activity that are water use dependent, because they know you need to have that.
Right.
So yeah, there is language like that available. Yep.
So if we were to look at those areas, if we could identify them, right?
Some of them aren't identified. That's the other thing.
Some of them are identified.
So some wetlands, they don't show up on our GIS maps, but until someone goes out and does the survey, an environmental scientist, they're able to tell, okay, this is a wetland. Case in point, the wetland that was being filled in was not on our GIS maps. But when he went out and did the survey, the environmental scientist said, nope, this is a wetland. You're gonna have to go to DEP for a review. Yeah.
Does it have to be a certain size to be considered a wetland?
That in our ordinance, yes, it has to be greater than 2 acres, and then
Wetland
connected
has to
to a stream, yes. So there are freshwater wetlands that are like brushy, shrubby type stuff, that if they're not connected to a water body, then there's no
Well-
protections for them.
I would think that most are connected eventually.
Well,
Beavers do help out with that. They create their own.
But again, to your point, we built up on a marshy wetland area way back when, and that soil's still there. Maybe they were connected at one time until someone decided I wanted to build a house here, and it disconnected them.
Yeah, well, where I am,
Yeah,
it's wet, but there are culverts that direct the water under the road and under the road again. What?
oh, make sure we speak in the mic. I forgot we have a transcriber for the, I know, it's right, you.
Does it make sense, and is it feasible to, on the map you were just showing us for the growth areas, is there an overlay for lots that are undeveloped as of now? Privately or town-owned, doesn't matter, but that
So you want to,
have yet to be built on.
so you want to know how many have been vacant, like there's just nothing on?
Yeah, like,
No structures.
what areas in our growth area, it has potential for growth?
Yep, we do have that in the comp plan. Let me see if I can find that for you.
A visual would be, and then overlay that with the flood areas. And,
It's not that many parcels of vacant land, truly just vacant. Let me see if I can pull that up for you. But yeah, I mean, we can. I think what more your concern will be is, what about these lots that have something on them, but they have the density ability that they can put another unit
Right.
on it?
Right.
right,
And then the accessory apartments on top of that. You currently allow for a 20% lot coverage for your land use ordinance. However, outside of shoreline zoning, you only count 20% of building coverage. So that means any shed, house, garage, but the roads aren't counted. Patios aren't counted outside of shoreline zoning. Other towns
Driveways?
do count all impervious
No?
surface. They don't count it. Other towns do allow that, but for the town of Kennebunkport, we just allow for building lot coverage, which is the 20%.
So on top of a 20%, so if I have my main house and it's 20%, I build out to my 20% lot coverage, then I can put a shed on there
Nope,
if I'm outside of shoreline?
nope,
I can't put a shed on?
nope.
Okay, but I can put a patio there,
Yes, you can, yep.
and I can put a really big driveway with a whole bunch of parking spots.
Yep.
I
You
can,
can pave over the whole
I
lot.
could
if
pay
you-
over, I could pave
Yep,
over,
you pave it over everything, yep.
I can make 20% lot coverage, and then I can make the whole surface impervious if I
Yep.
wanted to, if
If you wanted to.
I wanted.
And I was
If I
like,
wanted that
yeah,
look.
if you want that look, no maintenance
No
law.
maintenance free, maintenance free, and all the water runs off to somebody else.
That surprised me.
Right, and just, how often is this gonna happen? Like, I know we're talking about like something ridiculous, but who's gonna put gravel and pavement all over their property?
Well,
And
if
I know
somebody-
it sounds frivolous, but is that what we're concerned about? In relation to, you know, we also, the roads, he just said that we aren't even concerned about, but there's the effort to do, you know, other things where we want to expand the roads and put, walking or bikes and stuff, which I think is great, but should we be concerned about that too? You know, because that's also adding an area that we're covering up that's not necessarily the natural contour that was there before, you know?
Yeah.
I think we gotta
Well,
look at other things, and then also the, you know, I wanna know, I don't want to dictate to say you can't do what you want with your property.
Right.
Within reason, for example, like you said, the person that's gonna go out and cover their whole property with pavement, if that's how they wanna spend their money, I think they're crazy, but, you know,
Yeah, I think-
well,
you know,
yes and no. I mean,
As long as they can control, as long as they can maintain all the stormwater on their property.
If-
That's,
well, yeah, but
right?
I think we would all be like, hey, we have a new town fool, or what, like, what are they doing? Like,
but no, what if somebody built like several apartment buildings with enough parking for all of it in one of the downtown lots?
right, but the
That's not
example,
ideal.
so go through that with the example you said, you couldn't, you can't, if you're at 20%,
No, but if you go back, so that's our current, right? So now maybe we fast forward into LD 2003 and then using it as an example for you're in the growth area. And then what could given you're in the growth area and you can do, what could a structure, does your lot coverage change? Your lot coverage capability change if you're in the growth area?
Nope.
So we're always going to be at the 20%.
You're all at 20%.
Okay.
Yep.
But I could do, instead of one structure, I could do,
Depending on what your density is.
depending on what my density is.
So,
If you're talking an apartment complex, you can have your 20% building out of the shoreland zone.
Yep.
But the rest of the whole property can be paved with no grass, and if it happens to be in an area that contributes to flooding, then you've flooded your neighbors. This has happened, very recently in my neighborhood, just with new single-family houses and new roads, and everybody down below is saturated, who weren't saturated before. A whole row of houses from the uphill development. So it's very real.
So I think part of this is, it's not so much, Jim, that we would want to restrict a person's private property rights within ordinances. I think the way I look at this is specifically what we're trying to do is the growth map itself now brings in other capabilities, right? So the dictate of you being in a growth area is going to allow certain things under LD 2003. And I think the view, that's the view that we need to look at our growth, our current designated growth area, because once we say go, then things on the books, this will be on the book. And so then we just want to be the stewards of making sure that that growth area, as it's going to be utilized now, is how we want it, that's the parameters. Otherwise, it would be transition area, and then it would have, people could still do what they want with their private property. They just want to be under the growth area, which whatever LD 2003 allows them more. I think that's,
Yeah, and I think it's good to take a pragmatic approach and don't lead this with fear and
Oh, yeah,
and
no,
everything
no,
else, because I
yeah.
just I don't think anybody wants to be drastic and in pursuit of creating more restriction per se.
Right.
So-
I think that's, I think I'm 100% with you. You never want to go out with fear and look at it that way. But at the other hand, I look at this town as has very much like the beach, like Goose Rock's beach area. It was developed a long time ago before how new towns would be constructed with the correct drainage. Our town doesn't have that, and we're not going to get it, So I think it's just a matter of making sure, even though we're going to put in the suggestion is, for the ordinance to make sure you take care of your water runoff, or that you're not creating more. I think it just is incumbent upon this committee to try to just at least put the mental, go through the mental process to say, yeah, this feels right. This growth area feels right for, this area should be the growth area of the town. It means more, right? So the growth area means more people, more buildings, more.
So Liz, to answer your question on the growth area, there are a total of 144 parcels in the growth area. However, 33 of them are most likely undevelopable based off soil conditions or other factors. 30 of them are potentially developable, and then 81 of them are developable. And I can show you all a screenshot of this. See if I can get that. This is in your comprehensive plan.
And we don't know how much of the 81 that are developable.
So right there is the town map. Let's see if I can zoom in. So red is your developable, blue is potential, and then the yellow is likely undevelopable, which makes sense when you're Turbot's Creek. There's probably a lot of marshland and other issues. So these are all the vacant, not developed parcels currently as of your comp plan.
And that dark black line that's the growth.
Yep, right here.
Between growth and transition.
Yep.
Okay. And so red is developable
There's not much
Yep.
in the growth
lots,
areas.
vacant or whatever, owned by a single individual or whatever.
Yeah, you'll notice that parcel that you asked me to identify that's down at the very bottom here, it's not highlighted because there is a house on it, so it's not considered
Right.
vacant.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. So this was in your.
Yeah, so there
comprehensive-
could be properties with 10 acres and one house on them
Right.
as well.
Yep.
Which then would be able to be further developed.
Subdivision.
As long as
Sure.
they meet all the requirements.
Requirements.
Yep.
So going back to the question on the flood permits.
Yep.
Floodplain management permits. Are there, if we were to able to define, can we modify the definition of what would be required to get that permit? In other words, if we have certain areas where there's significant floodwaters from storms that we know of, can we define that? and say these areas would require you to get that permit?
So that permit is required by FEMA. So that's that floodplain ordinance that's gonna be adopted hopefully by the voters this upcoming June. That's a requirement from FEMA. We have to go off FEMA's maps. We obviously made a amendment to that because we thought that the federal maps were not correct and accurate. And so they did just approve that, so it will go into effect, when we adopt our.
And
low
FEMA's are accurate?
Yes, that ours are accurate.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I thought you said FEMA. I was
Nope,
like,
ours are
I
accurate.
didn't think so.
Yep. So that's gonna be in effect, in those areas. So anywhere that we saw on the GIS map, that is where they are required to get one of those permits.
Okay, will that include the 100-year floodplain?
Yep.
Okay, does it include the 500-year floodplain?
I'd have to look at that one. I don't know if it's the 500.
So can you,
But it doesn't include anything that would be relative to stormwater.
No.
right, so can you explain that permit?
Can we add that to it?
Yeah, so they have to obtain this permit. Obviously, they need their main DEP permissions as well for that location. But essentially, they would get that permit in addition to their building permit. It's a separate requirement. And it's basically to make sure that the base flood elevation is meeting the requirements of wherever they are in that floodplain.
And where they're building is out of the flood?
No,
Or
they
can be-
they
or-
can, but they have to be above the base flood elevation.
Right,
Yep.
right. Which that, and I think that survey also works in their favor or works for them to get out of paying flood insurance. They can go if they get a mortgage and they can show that their house, existing house or whatever, is not within that flood, they don't have to pay flood insurance. If they are, then obviously they have to build higher to forego that flood insurance.
Unless they pay cash.
Unless they pay, yeah, absolutely. You can build a house,
Yeah.
10 feet underground if you really want to, but
Yeah. Your loss.
Jim, I think
Right.
I think you still have to get flood insurance. Let's say you're getting a mortgage and you're in per the elevation maps, you're in a designated flood area, and you build a brand new house and you just build all your mechanicals and everything above the base elevation level as required, you just get cheaper flood insurance because the risk is much less. But you can't move yourself out of the zone.
no, what I meant by that, if years ago, because of storms, predominantly New Orleans, FEMA just went and blanketed maps around everywhere. And it was up to the private owner, if you wanted to get a mortgage, if it was on a marsh or close to a river or whatever, the mortgage company said, you got to get in flood insurance or prove that you're outside of that flood area. So you'd have to go and get FEMA or get a surveyor to survey the area and prove it because FEMA wasn't telling you it was outside. You couldn't rely on their maps. So if you can prove that you're outside of it, then you can forego that flood insurance. But you're right, if you are in that area, you got to get it. The bank's going to require that.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of standards. If you look at the floodplain ordinance, that for new development locating in a floodplain, there's a bunch of standards they have to follow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's administered through the code enforcement officer.
So I'm just trying to understand whether or not we have enough protections in place, or do we have to add more in our growth area, right? Or do we have to redesign our growth area to handle the concerns on water from stormwater?
Yeah, that's,
I would prefer to just keep the growth area the way it is and to have the other layers of protection to basically allow people to build homes in the parcels they bought, but they just need to be able to manage their stormwater in some way. And we put some ordinance in place for all new construction to have that, right? So you keep the stormwater on your property.
I think it's a healthy balance with like what Paul was saying, like, we don't want to assume that anybody can just, manage their own storm water. Like, who knows how to do that? I wouldn't know how to do that.
No, you hire.
So yeah, and I think that like what Paul was mentioning months ago, like, there should be a standard based on like your lot coverage, you know, you could have a small lot or whatever. I think it's prudent for us to say you know, you have to have, like somebody do a site survey and indoctrinate whatever standard to prevent, you know, say Paul's house down the hill from dealing with all that water.
Right.
But also, I think the other issue is if we're looking at within the growth, I mean, if we look at the contour of where houses are and where they've been built and the draws where predominantly the streets probably went through, because it's easier to manage, they weren't blasting or whatever, they're where that water is gonna go, that's gonna have to be an issue, and that's probably a bigger discussion to say, like, if water continues to, or if this area continues to get saturated and we have surges, we gotta manage those streets, you know, like the example that you were referring to. And I don't know what the answers to that are, but possibly over time, you have to build reservoirs or a bigger volume that can handle that drainage.
But that's the problem, is that, you know, we have small streets, and then we have a lot of houses within our village are outside of ordinance, right? They're, what do you call that? I can't think of the word.
Non-conforming.
Non-conforming.
Non-conforming?
Yeah, are non-conforming, right? So we already have a situation where we've got sort of lack of good drainage, you know? And so there isn't, if you go through town, there's really not a place where you could, like, if you see, like, for example, if you go up where they're building, some other towns where they're building some of these new, you know, high-density areas, they'll have the pretty flat fountain out front where they're dumping all their water into, you know, and creating almost like a little pond on the site. We can't really do that in town, right? And that's where I keep coming back to. Our town is pretty tight. So that's just something to put on the table, right? So if you guys are saying, okay, if there's a way to handle the runoff for somebody on their lot and not add, and if that's, you know, that's the committee's recommendation, you know, that's a way to handle it. But I think it's just that we make sure that we consider how much, but we didn't do that, right? Did we do that or didn't we, with the water runoff? I thought some of that language got taken out.
No, they did keep for accessory apartments, they did keep that standard in there.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
So is that where you guys are headed, is maybe making a recommendation to keep that standard in for the growth area, or?
For the whole town-wide, for new construction. That's kind of what we were talking about, and that's what what's his name from the planning board, his concern with doing it only for accessory was we should do it for others and we shouldn't be inconsistent. Otherwise, people are going to build big garages without any regard for water, and then a year later it becomes an accessory dwelling unit to get around the drainage requirement.
So maybe it makes sense, I guess what I wouldn't want to see if we're considering not necessarily the growth, but the whole town, I'd want to see the pain points. Where in town are the pain points?
Or the what?
The pain points, the surge areas, what you were suggesting.
Yeah,
Show me where they are.
yeah.
If it's just the growth area, then, you know, I may, probably my opinion would be like, I would only want to worry about the growth areas at this point.
Well, isn't it gonna be any area where there's a hill, like what you were saying?
Well, no, some areas actually have some, I think it might be good just to check it off the list of maybe having Chris with Galen, you know, talk us through when we have, you know, super saturated land and we get these summer storms, because remember, we had a summer storm too that was pretty bad. Winter storms, you know, what are there areas in our growth area, which they know what it is, that, you know, cause you concern. You know, there's no easy solution for water runoff, and is there areas? And then maybe that discussion can be had with Chris and the other department heads that know of this area, and they'd say, you know what, we get this, but if we're gonna add more houses in this area, it's no concern. You know, just have people handle their own water runoff. You know, I think it would be good just to sort of like get their feedback, get their understanding, because they see this live. You know, I saw it after a major event. I know from down at the beach where there's areas that flood, and it doesn't have to be a major event, you know, but that's a whole different story. I think the growth area in town, I was sort of surprised that there were areas that were not on the shore that were having water problems. You know, I think that was the concern.
So this brings up the thought, like, so we can't be the only coastal town that has concerns with this. Do you hear any buzz, like there's towns that may be a little bit ahead of us that feel that, like, yeah, this is going to be an issue. So, like, we want pushback against the state. Like, you know, this just doesn't, you know, there's got to be a healthy balance. Like, you know, yeah, we want somebody to, like, be able to, like, do something with their property, but this is within reason. Like, if this proposal means we're going to offset and create an environmental issue, then maybe you got to peel back this a little bit. I mean, is there any resistance? Is there any, like, compromise to with the people that are up there to say, like, you can't blanket this. This doesn't make sense. Like, we got to do this within reason. We got to take these other variables into consideration. One for us is this issue, this surge water. Are there any towns that are doing
Yeah, so
pushback, I guess?
Pushback to
The state?
the state on.
Yeah, the ones that are, you know, imposing all this.
Oh, for for LD 2003. I mean, yeah, there are towns that are pushing back.
Is there going to be any traction on that, you think?
I haven't heard anything as of
Do
recent.
you think, all right, so, and maybe this is your opinion, but do you think that's an option?
I think there's other levers at the land use planning level that you have at your disposal to address development concerns in the future. I'd also advise not to just focus on where pressure points are in stormwater collection. Just from knowing hydrology a little bit to be dangerous, water takes the path of least resistance. And so I think town-wide, you're going to have concerns over tiny little cuts in impervious surface that are eventually going to funnel into those areas that you see as the pressure points. So we have to address what we have now. That's going to be done more on department level and through the select board with capital improvements that need to be made, long-term capital improvements. But in the short term, you know, what can you do now is look at development in your town, how you'd like to control that. The state's going to do what the state's going to do, but you still have a lot of power at your disposal. And I keep articulating this to both the growth planning and planning board and board of selectmen. LD 2003, while it did make an unfunded mandate, it didn't take away your requirements for lot coverage, setbacks. I mean, you can do a lot in those areas right there. Net residential density, it didn't really change that other than giving you a bonus a little bit for that. You do have some levers at your disposal that you can sort of curb the impact on surrounding abutters. And that's what, when I look at this, and we get phone calls, especially after rainstorms, well, so-and-so's property is where the water's coming from. And it's all of us collectively are contributing to this. It's not just one person. We all are responsible for the impervious surface on our property and how we manage it. So I think it's a good conversation to have. I think it's hopefully a worthy goal that the Board of Selectmen say, this is something we do want you to focus on this year. But that's...
If we're going to only bottle it and send it to California, they need it, right?
Well, and it's not just the impervious parts of property. A lot of homes now built with like a drainage around it, under the ground, that then is piped in different directions away from the house. And if
Some
that
French
is
drains,
headed
yeah.
towards a neighbor, that screws the neighbor.
Possibly.
I have that in my house. I mean, most houses,
Yeah.
you'd be foolish not to do that around the footing.
Right, but
There's
then,
piping and
you're
it,
screwing the
and
neighbor.
mine goes 150 feet away and pops up. But my house is all on a ledge. I blasted into the ledge. And
but
if
so
I
how do you
didn't do
prevent
that,
that moving forward to not screw your neighbor and flood them out?
Right.
Can people just do that? Can you just
Right now you
aim
can.
it towards your
Right now you
neighbor
can.
and?
Right now you can. Right now you
Yep.
can. So let's,
They're carved out. They're not
yeah.
part of that process. Yeah.
so that's the one thing we have to look at doing.
Yep.
We put a little bit of language in there for the accessory apartments.
Yep.
We need to look at a
Single family,
Why?
two family.
Yeah,
stormwater management
Yep.
for single-family homes.
Nope. Sheds, garages.
Whatever we
Yeah.
can do.
Garages that are
anything.
800 square feet or more, you don't.
So I think between that and the shoreline zone, the requirement for those floodplain management permits, I think there's a lot of protection that if, in our broad brush of the growth area, if we missed a parcel or two that shouldn't be considered that because of those risks, they're gonna get captured by those other these gates.
I
right?
did.
So you can get your growth permit and you go there and you find out, okay, it's gonna cost me a lot more money than I thought to build, 4 homes on this parcel.
But that's
Because
if,
of-
yeah, that's if you're in the floodplain. Are you then adding that
Well,
if we
even
did
though
a,
we had that ordinance in place now, you got to be, so if they can manage all their stormwater on site, then I'd have less concern that they put the 4 homes there.
so, yeah, so you're saying in the future, if we
the
get the
future.
ordinance inside.
We gotta get that
Can,
ordinance in place.
so when we were talking with the gentleman from the planning board, wasn't there a discussion around how to enforce? Like, it was questionable about how they would actually go about enforcing the water containment. I thought, I remember him saying something like that. It was mainly like who on the planning board would be able to evaluate, whether or not.
It's not a planning
So
board
it's not them, it'd be
issue,
the
it's
code
a,
enforcement
The
it's
code
a staff
enforcement,
issue.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
sorry,
Yep.
wrong term.
Yep, that would be something that we would do administratively in-house. Other towns, this is not the first town to come up with this, so
That's first rodeo.
I will say that our code enforcement officers, they will have to go get training, because they don't do it right now. Like, you don't have that standard. Right now, if you have a site plan review or subdivision review that requires stormwater analysis, we send it to Acorn Engineering. Now, these are a lot larger projects, so, they look at the engineering models, they look at stormwater rate flows, pre and post development. These are smaller projects, they're not gonna have as much surface, stormwater and surface area, concerns. So there are model ordinances and there is training available to code enforcement officers to look at a plan and say, okay, is this going to be an impact, or do you have to do some tree plantings right here because there's a slope that goes down to your neighbor to help, try to slow things down.
Okay.
So yeah, there's training available.
So there's training,
Yep.
best practices, and
Yep.
then the code.
Yep.
Okay.
I'll share.
Hey,
this-
Jim, Yes.
You have something, Paul?
yeah, I just wanted to make a comment to Jim. Even though, like, you're lucky, you have no immediate neighbors, you do something, it seems to have no impact. But if you look at the flood maps, and in fact, all the flooding at Goose Rocks and the area that, people were stuck in their houses for days, and you look at the flood maps and you say, oh, gee, why is, the ocean fronts aren't in the 100-year floodplain, but 500 yards away on the bay side, on the riverside, they are in the flood map, and they did get flooded, and the flooding pretty much mirrored the FEMA maps pretty accurately. And all of that, the fear is you get high tides, and the water is coming down the bats and running for miles away. Same thing on the Little River. The water's all running downstream. It gets trapped in there at a high tide, and people lost furnaces, entire basements, everything. And we, I think, realize and probably acknowledge we're getting more storms and more serious storms every year. At least that's the pattern. So water management today isn't what it was 5 years ago, I don't think, or 10 years ago. So those of us in the lowland are concerned about what comes towards us.
No, and I agree with you. I think when there's a surge, the water comes in. It takes longer to get out or go away. I mean, I'm not denying any of that.
Yeah, but it comes from all over town. It just doesn't come, the water from all over town runs toward the coast.
Yeah,
That's the way the town is built.
So I'm gonna share this screen because I found it in your comp plan. The growth map with the buffer shading. Again, it's probably gonna be a little bit hard to see, but at least the dark lines, you'll be able to sort of get an idea. So this is our growth area. You'll see the yellow right there. That's your water district, where the water lines are, which is the 1,000-foot buffer. And then the orange color that you see in the growth area, that's your sewer. And as you can see, it's most of the parcel area is where your growth area is where your utilities are. So I think that was the justification for why you picked that as your growth area, which makes sense. The state agrees that's where you should be directing growth. The more you have private septics, greater chance it is for water contamination and groundwater contamination and issues for neighbors and the
At what
environment.
point is growth sufficient? Like, at one point can you say, okay, we've had our growth and
We've grown.
we've grown?
We've grown.
It's great.
I've been asking that for
It's a great question.
a long
Yeah.
time.
Good question.
That's not the American way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the state's trying to get more housing.
Well,
on a-
So
on a
the answer
broad
is
scale.
never?
Well, that's why we have the permits in place.
And we have the
Well-
growth permits, so that limits how many permits can be
That
issued.
was a discussion back when we started in 2005 to make the 2012 plan. Whether or not the growth permits were legal. And and we found out we just needed to be able to justify them, right? And that's when we went through and said, okay, this is how we'll justify. And then we had the 40 as the number, and that's when we set the math, where we're gonna look at the last 10 years and multiply that by 110%, so that we're not saying we can't grow, that someday we're not gonna have 41 permits, or 42, or 44, or 50. But it's gonna take a while, and it will give us time to be able to manage it and say, okay, we're growing, and you know what, we're gonna have to run a sewer line someplace else, right? And we have to direct it where we want that to go. It'll be somewhere into the transitional area.
So that's the
So
plan,
then-
is
but then the
eventually to
town-
move the growth into the transitional area.
Well, it would happen, I think, over time.
Okay, so,
There's no plan.
That's not a plan to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not any
so
plan to
the-
do
and
that.
and
but
there's no
Discourage the
maximum.
out-of-staters from
But
moving.
a developer could slowly do that, right? A developer could look at it and say, well, you know what, I've got a nice area here, I could put lots here, and I'll pay for that main sewer line extension,
Right, which is
Right.
what happened.
which is what, it has happened in the past, and because of where that was located, we kept it transitional.
Right.
For other reasons.
Right.
But, if it were to happen where they drove it up, Log Cabin Road, and there was, then we could extend it. But we would still have to, this committee would still have to say, we agree to extend the growth area.
So what do we do with the multiple surveys that have been done over the past however many years, where the majority of people say no more growth?
Well, it's
No
the
more
state-
development.
We can't do that with the state law. State won't
Well,
allow us to
you-
say we
you-
can't grow anymore, that we can't issue any more permits. You correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, and you're right, and again, you have these lots too that, when you have a lot that's in conformance, it's that homestead rule, that you have a right to put a house
Yeah.
on a property, like that's the American dream, so like that's,
Amen.
that's, how do you balance that? The need to look out for the environment, but also people's rights, and that's where you all play that important policy-making role of, trying to balancing the needs of the community.
And then
Yep.
try to balance, their right to build.
Yep.
With your right to build, but let's not impact your neighbors.
Yep.
And that's where we gotta do something with stormwater. We've done a lot with all the other things, we haven't done anything with the stormwater piece.
So the last, another part, I always wondered about this, so I'm glad I know you guys on this committee. But, so again, I'm not looking at this as personal property, meaning that you cannot have your homestead on it. I'm looking at it in terms of what being designated as a growth area means in higher density. So again, if we go back to the town growth area, how do towns with limited elbow room work through saying that this is a growth area where we're going to allow higher density? How do you handle traffic? Like, how is that overlaid? Because I had to get someplace today, and I had to drive down Route 1 in Kennebunk, and I did not allow enough time for it to be, close to that season after Easter now. Now it's after Easter. Before it used to be after Memorial Day, but now it's after Easter. And I didn't allow enough time on Route 1. I mean, it's like slow moving. There's no place for any of the cars to go. So if we take that and we flip it over, in our town, Main Street and stuff popping up, those are areas. And if we go and look at the other areas coming in, we have, we have North Street to get in to the town this way. We go over the bridge, that's an exit, and you got Ocean Ave. So out of the port area and then getting around, we just don't have these, and we don't have ability, as far as I can tell, and that's maybe a question to the growth committee and to Galen. Usually towns then go to 4-lane roads,
Hopefully not.
No, but my point is, if we're going to do growth in a growth area, how do we handle the traffic?
Right. So, you're right, if we're going to allow the growth, we don't have the infrastructure to accommodate it.
I believe that's part of a discussion anytime they're looking at a subdivision, but certainly not when you're looking at a single, someone comes in, they just want to put a home on their lot, you're not going to look at the traffic. Get back on track.
Right.
Right.
So, in more commercial type development, heavier development, Maine DOT does have a traffic study requirement. I believe it's 100 trips per day or more. They require a traffic study. Developers sometimes they say it's going to be only this amount, and I question sometimes their logic and how they determine the calculations. But Maine DOT does have a big book where it says this is the use, this is how many trips per day that they estimate. So if it meets that definition, that use of what the state has, and it's meeting those requirements, Maine DOT will not require a traffic study if it's under that 100 day requirement, 100 persons per day, 100 trips per day for that property.
What
And that's
about-
exiting to the street itself.
What about emergency purposes, like having space? I mean, we have like narrow streets, so if a fire truck needs to get through, or, a police vehicle, but a fire truck, it's big, on narrow streets, and if we have more density and more people and more traffic. And we have that in the summertime anyway.
Right, that's a
don't know
question.
how they
I'm
do
sure both chiefs would be able to answer that question
Put bigger bumpers
adequately.
on it?
I'm sure they have creative ways of taking care of if there's, a stranded vehicle or something that's on the
Wasn't there a
road.
question about that up around the Colony area recently? I don't know.
But-
I mean, that's
Somebody
all,
raised a
any
question.
new construction on roads is taken in that all into account. But of course, getting there, you still have to drive down the older roads that are.
And your land use standards do have, if you look in the land use code, there are certain standards that have to apply for site plan review. If a development wants to go in and it's an access driveway or a road or a public street, they have certain requirements they have to meet for site distance, the width of the road, its distance from other points of egress. So you do have some standards already in place for even residential development that wants to come in, even for just 3 units.
And when you're referring to that as the driveway entrance, if the speed limit's 40 miles an hour, I think the visibility is times 10? So it's got, the visibility's got be 400 feet unless it's a natural contour curve or something.
There's a whole.
Yeah.
there's a whole thing.
but-
It's like 10 for every 10 feet.
Yeah.
For every mile per hour. So
Yeah, yeah, so
300
40
feet for a
foot
30 mile an hour.
visibility on either
Yeah.
way, but the driveway has to be 12, minimum of 12 feet for the emergency vehicle to get through and pass
Yep.
another vehicle.
And then there's even at the end of the street, depending how long it is, is it a cul-de-sac at the end of it? Is it a hammerhead? What's the design? So you have street design standards already in place to
Which
deal
we
with
did that last year, right? We approved that?
Yep,
Okay.
that's always been in your
Yeah.
land use ordinance. The other thing is you also have the public works director, before anyone can create a new driveway, they have to get a curb cut permit from him, and the police department, they go out and they check the area that's being suggested. And a permit's not issued until it meets their okay. For sight distance, traffic safety, all that fun stuff. So I think
Hey,
you have
Galen?
standards in there. Yep.
Back to water. Earlier in discussion, I was inclined to think if, not just because of your comment, because I've always wondered about the difference on what's included in lot coverage in the shoreland versus non-shore land. And I think you commented something to the extent you were surprised to see that was not usual. But I guess my question would be, in terms of going forward, my inclination would be, well, we should just make that standard throughout town. And my question is, if we had a decent stormwater ordinance in place for any new construction, would that kind of have the same effect as changing the lot coverage definition for non-shore land zone? So that if you covered your whole, if you wanted 30 parking spaces in your parking lot and you paved it for 4th of July, so you had enough for your family and friends, you would have to deal with that water in some way. And maybe you'd be inclined to only go with 20 parking spaces or 10 parking spaces if the burden was too high. Thoughts?
Yeah, so it all depends, Paul, it's a good question. So it depends on what your stormwater ordinance will detail. Again, the attorneys are gonna make sure that we cross-reference your lot coverage of what you wanna count it as. There is technology out there, believe it or not, that it's called pervious concrete. And basically what it is it has these pores. I'm gonna see if I can get a piece for our open house to show you the technology. It's kind of cool. And you can just keep putting gallons of water through this and it goes right through, and it's considered pervious. It's not impervious. And so that wouldn't be if it's in your stormwater ordinance, it says, okay, lot coverage includes all impervious surface. Well, if your parking lot is made with this technology, that would be excluded from that because you're sustainably keeping that water on the
Where is it
property.
going?
It goes into a catch basin and a retention area underground to keep it in slow release over time.
Wow.
Yep. So they can do the calculations on that kind of stuff and figure out how it will not impact the current flow on the property. So it's amazing stuff what's out there. There is a maintenance component to it. I'm going to put full disclosure.
Yeah.
There is a maintenance component. There is a special sweeper that you have to use to clean because there's pores, so you'll actually see it, and they can get clogged with mud and stuff. So you have to make sure that you clean it on a regular basis. But for all intents and purposes, it does count. Now, in your shoreland zoning, they call all non-vegetative surfaces. And at a point in time in DEP's rulemaking, they determined that you've probably seen these pavers where they have like the grass in between. They used to count that as a vegetative surface because the theory was, well, the grass in there, it'll grow and it'll keep the water from going great distances. But their studies found that the grass never grew in between those, and so they count them as non-vegetative surfaces. So as code and permitting, we always advise people when they come in, they say, well, this is a non-vegetative surface, it's the pavers. And we say, no, we do have to count that, unfortunately.
But what about rock driveways where are stone?
Yep,
Those are
Yep.
impervious?
they're considered impervious,
Impervious.
yep. because you're still compacting the soil and it's bare ground, so it's allowed, the water's allowed to go.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
gravel will still, it'll
Yeah.
percolate through gravel. It does on my property.
A little bit, not as well as if it were grassed and vegetated.
Yeah, well, to a certain state, if, I mean, if
But
it's,
you're
if
saying
it's,
that it's
if there's a,
impervious.
as this
Yeah.
huge surge, it's gonna go over it. If it's migrating, it goes through it,
So
or
clay,
under it.
clay is a funny soil
Ugh.
particle. Clay is actually the smallest pore particle size, and it's so small that it has like these little leaflets, I like to call it, little folds. And that's what allows nutrients to get stuck in there, but it also is great for holding water, retaining water. And so when it's full, yeah, it's a great sponge, but then after it's full, there's nowhere for that water to go and it just sheets. And so that's the problem with clay is it just, it doesn't work well for open surface area.
Which in a lot of spots around here, you go down 2 feet, you're gonna find it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to show you before we maybe move on, if there's any other questions, but the question was asked about housing. I did come across, and I'll share my screen. This is your data as of 2021 in your comp plan for the building permits that were, the growth permits that were issued per zone. And you'll see the top two are your free enterprise zone, which only a portion is in the growth area, and Goose Rocks is in the transition zone. So these are your historic numbers of where housing is actually taking place in your town. So. Okay.
Good.
So any other thoughts, comments, questions? Any direction?
I look forward to getting more information to, you know, find out where we're at.
Okay.
You know, in certain areas of the town, specifically the growth, so we can make more of an informed decision and recommendations.
So,
What information, though? The,
Well, kind of what we were talking before, like, I'm curious, like, where in towns the major areas are, and, you know, to try to make a better assessment on what direction.
But we don't know exactly where we can have growth in the growth area now, is that right? I mean, we don't know what lots are available.
James, are you talking about non-coastal, non-shoreland areas that
Yes.
aren't on FEMA maps that are flooding currently
Yes,
in big storms?
yes, I'd be curious about that.
so non-floodplain areas that are flooding. That's what you're asking for.
Yeah, where the
guess
infrastructure
that could-
and/or houses.
What are we doing with this? That's
I
what
guess
I'm
the
trying
areas
to-
that would be a concern, I kind of want to know, like, I mean, I know we just looked at the whole area, just kind of curious in relation to,
what would that drive, though?
Where can we have growth in the growth area? I mean, what
Well,
lots or what,
I mean,
Basically, any-
Well, the growth area is gonna allow you to get a growth permit, right?
yeah, but
LD
some areas.
2003 lets you do a couple other things that are a little bit different.
But you can, you can subtract from that the floodplain and the.
Well, you don't really subtract from it, it's just that there's another layer of, say, protection to ensure that any construction that's done is taken into account.
Oh, okay,
Those
so you can
requirements,
allow
so
it
they
as
just
long as
ca-
they can
yeah,
get the
But then they gotta
permits.
they gotta
The-
do things to meet another.
Shoreland zoning requires double your lot and residential density for wherever that area is, if you want to build in the shoreland. So even though it's 40,000, you double it if it's shoreland.
So you can't just
Yeah,
move places, you have to just.
and LD
Add
2003 is
layers of-
There are limitations on those areas. So I guess I need to understand before we go investigate staff time and resources,
Yeah.
what information is helpful in making that decision, or do you not want to touch the growth map currently?
What is the decision we have to make? What decision?
Well, the direction I was given was that you wanted to look at the growth maps to see if you want to make changes to them. Do you still want to make changes to the growth maps? That's my first question.
You mean the growth area?
Yes.
Area map.
Yep.
And explain the changes again.
I don't want to make changes to the growth map personally.
Right, but what are the suggested changes?
I don't have any.
Okay, all right, okay,
Yep.
all right, okay.
Yeah.
think
What
the
I do want to do is, I want to work on a stormwater management ordinance,
Okay.
right? To help control that stormwater, to alleviate some areas that would have the potential to cause additional problems if we were to build there.
Would you at least want to, so to answer Paul's question to Jim about getting the areas that flood, that are not
Well,
floodplain?
if we know what those are, it'd be good to have that,
Yeah, and I think maybe,
just to sort of use that as we're developing the standard. Is that going to help solve this issue?
yeah, and I think that would
Yeah.
be, it may not solve the issue,
Well,
but it may not, you don't want to exasperate it,
we don't want to create another one that like that either,
right?
right? So
Yeah,
it's-
so maybe get some guidance. I think maybe the action would be
To get,
to get guidance from Chris Simonelli, and, with input from the other department heads if needed, on what areas within the growth plain right now have flooding during high, high rainwater content storms.
You said it very much more eloquently than I did. That's what I'm looking for.
so, I mean, I guess the way to identify that would just be the roads. I don't want to get into people's personal property.
No, I would ask them for areas. And so I
Areas,
think Chris and those guys could come in, and then you could have
Yeah.
the dialogue with him, just maybe live, in one of these meetings or whatever, about, if this is in the growth area and we ask people per the a new ordinance for runoff, would we, is that enough to circumvent any making it worse, right? And I think that's the due diligence sort of check, right?
How long would it take for the department people to be brought up to speed on the training?
For code,
Yeah,
they'd probably have 2 or 3 workshops to go through.
okay. And do you know when those happen?
I'd have to go.
Okay.
I'd check with SMPDC, and then a municipal association sometimes hosts those types of trainings.
Yeah,
Yep.
May it be a while before we can get an ordinance in place anyways.
Yeah. And we have,
But you could
again,
always outsource some of that.
we do have a new code enforcement officer that will be starting next Monday.
awesome.
So,
yeah.
yes.
Great. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm
You got
excited.
expertise in stormwater management?
No, we're really excited to have him. He has a former code enforcement officer experience in another town, so that'll
Okay,
be
good.
well received. I'm excited.
Great news.
Yep. Okay, so I'll do those 2 points, and then we'll hopefully get direction from the Board of
Yeah, I
Selectmen,
mean,
because that's really who's going to tell us this is what we need to work on this year.
So I will preface that if
Yep.
they say, no, we don't want you to spend any time working on stormwater
Yep.
management, then we do need to think about what we do then with growth area maps. But I think we can manage it with that.
So what do you what do you mean if they say no? What
In other words, if they
do you
say-
think they would specifically say no on?
If they,
Like the infrastructure portion or?
no,
or-
if they didn't want to have an ordinance on stormwater management for all properties
Okay,
for construction, for whatever reason, they may have other concerns, something that we haven't thought about.
okay,
So that's not a direction that Galen can put some of his resources on.
yeah.
Right. Then we would have to think, okay, if we can't do that, then maybe there are parcels in the area, in the growth area, that we're gonna have to figure out a way to separate out, right?
What are your thoughts, Mary Beth, on the Board of Selectmen? Do you think they,
So I think that the Board of Selectmen would probably take the guidance from the Growth Committee.
Okay.
And I think if that was maybe it's a flip way of looking at it, is if the Growth Committee wants to put forward recommendation to the board to say, we took a quick look and we're thinking, we took a look, we don't want to make a change to the growth map if we could do this.
Yeah.
And sort of give that, because I think you guys, you along with the planning board are more of the subject matter experts. along with Galen. And I think if this was something that Galen also agreed with, then maybe it could be a combined recommendation to the board of, you know, we think we're okay with that. I think flipping it around would be better. You might get a little bit more clear direction. And then if there was an issue with that, then they might ask you to go and look at something specific for that, so that you wouldn't be like in a yes/no situation. You know, if somebody wanted more information about that on the board, and then you could come back. And then that would be specific stuff that Galen, his team, or some other departments would pull.
Yeah, and full disclosure, I don't know, again, I'll find out from the planning board tomorrow. They might have the planning board might have other suggestions of other things we need to look at in the land use ordinance. I don't know what their thoughts are. They haven't met since
Right.
you all met, so.
Yep, okay. And then just to loop back to it for my own personal sake, I know we have the slow grow on the growth permits, which is good, to answer Jane's question before. But again, I just can't help thinking that, you know, we put up with high traffic during certain aspects of the month. And if we drop some serious developments in here with some high density, you know, now it becomes, because we can't go to 4-lane highways, you know, so we have a 2-lane bridge, you know, we have a lot of just 2 lanes. There's no, so I don't know how, and I don't know if Galen has, I mean, we are who we are. We're sort of bounded, you know, we can't stretch ourselves that way. And so I don't know how towns look at that from a traffic, you know, point of view. We do have to get from one one side of the town to the other. And most of us have to pass through Kennebunk to get someplace also, which is getting tough to do these days. Yeah. So I don't know how that plays in. It's probably not part of LD 2003, but just in general, you know, maybe some thought or guidance going forward of, how, you know, is it just an outcome? And when it gets to the point, you know, because we don't have buses, we don't have things, you know, we don't have things that people can just walk to if they need it. They have to actually get in their car to get something done, like doctors or food.
I have my own personal experiment that I'm going to try. Not this Friday. I was hoping it'd be on a Friday, but I'm not this Friday. But I was actually curious about commuting by bicycle from Saco to Kennebunkport for work to see what that experience would be like.
Don't do it
so
during the
I'll let
storm.
you know. Yeah. Yep.
Well, yeah, that's certainly one way, though. I mean,
Yeah.
that's, I would say when my kids were growing up, I'm maybe about 2 miles from town. And when my kids were growing up, it just really didn't feel comfortable having them in certain streets riding their bikes when they were little and so forth, right? Because it just wasn't wide enough. So it was always pack them in the car and bring them down for something, right?
Yeah.
If the streets, if we had,
town.
right? As they got older, you had less fear of it, right?
But I mean, still.
And there's certain areas in town where I would run, and other areas I would avoid running. And it's just the way our town is, and I don't see that we're gonna be able to, we've been able to fix some places with some expansion when there was those opportunities. I don't know if the department has that list, that, when this section of road comes due again in 10 years, we gotta take an opportunity to see if we can make it wider. I don't know if they have that.
No, I don't.
That list.
I don't think we have the physical capability.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you look, there's actually some trees. I wonder how come they're right next
But,
to the
yeah.
road.
When we moved here in '98, and I remember trying to get out of Dock Square was just miserable.
Yeah.
I don't know who the brilliant person was that came up with the 3-way stop signs, but that really solved a lot of problems. Everybody was talking at one point having lights, and we just put those 3 stops. So as long as there's people, they follow the rules of what you were taught when you were in driver's ed, the person to the right, they go, and then you go, and then the next person goes.
They don't teach that
And I
in
had a person
Massachusetts,
actually, I was driving engine 12 on a response, lights going and siren. I have to stop at a stop sign. You're not supposed to go through it. I had 2 people run in front of me. First one went, and I started to go, and the second one went as well.
Wow.
Don't they know you're supposed to get behind the vehicles, so then you
They
can
would
like
think.
go with them?
Yeah.
Crazy.
Up in front of
So
them.
I think, we just,
It's
Right,
about
but with more growth is gonna come more congestion.
I mean, I look at
yes,
it,
I've watched-
it can. I don't honestly see
With
that we
the-
are gonna grow like that.
Well,
I've
with
been on this committee
the,
for a long time,
with
and I haven't seen that
with LD
grow.
2003,
I don't see
these,
that's gonna work either,
these
honestly.
accessory apartments, and it's just more cars, and the,
It can,
what's the, heritage housing, I mean, it's just more houses.
So,
More houses, more people, more cars.
yeah,
but if we look back based on the permits we've given out,
yeah, we're
you
not,
know, how is that growth? But,
we're still at 40.
right, but yeah, right, but,
So we haven't hit 40 every year, so that we have to raise our average.
yeah. But I can see the concern is will that impact? If we, worst case scenario, the impact of this, creating accessory dwellings, what will that do? I mean, if we look at that as the concern, I still see this town, it's residential, it's rural residential. I mean, even like, parts like you go not too far from here, it's kind of rural residential, And I live in this town because that's where I want to live. And me personally, if we're going to get into personal opinions and stuff like that, I know I live out here. It's going to take me a little while to get over there.
And
But that's because I want to live here,
that keeps a lot of people from not wanting to live here.
Yeah, and
I
I think I'll be,
coaches, and
I-
they didn't want to live in Kennebunkport because of how long it took to get to the field or to get to Hannaford.
yeah,
So they
I
had the
mean,
wherewithal to buy here, for sure. But they decided to buy somewhere else.
yeah.
Because it was just closer to the things that they needed.
I don't think, in my opinion, the growth of people that live here, I'm not necessarily worried about that. I mean, I think I'll be far and gone before this place ever looks like Miami, where it's a metropolis. I don't know. Like, hopefully that doesn't happen, but,
Or it's that.
I believe in,
well, yeah, I think my question comes from ignorance in terms of how things happen. So like, it's almost like I'm peeling back the onion, knowing that, okay, there's a growth planning committee, I know the planning board doesn't think about traffic and roads. I know the board of selectmen, we don't really think about traffic and roads. So I venture into the growth committee now. It's like, do you guys think about traffic and roads? But now what I guess what I'm understanding, and again, it was a question from me. It wasn't really about LD 2003. It was more about experiences getting in through Kennebunk right now, even on the off season, on the off tourist season, and how much more congested it's getting. And then where does that get thought up of in town? Like, who's behind the curtain thinking about that? And what I'm hearing is it comes into play when we have a big development going in. And then there's DOT things, but DOT's not looking at it from, we have these little tiny, we don't have arteries, we have veins, And we don't even have veins, but we have the small capillaries out at the tip of your finger. So we don't have these traffic funnels, right? So I guess I understand. I just put it out there more so about just trying to figure out who thinks about this, and if it's just an outcome, it's an
We
outcome.
addressed it in the comprehensive plan, and we've got a section on transportation, so.
But
I
also-
forget specifically what we stated about that and who got strategies out of those. I'll have to look those up.
That's another concern I have about developing village parcel, whether it's, housing in the low-income housing or other housing, and if a lot of housing goes in there, forget trying to get through Dock Square ever.
Well, I think that maybe we should change the growth area and have it go up Log Cabin Road further. I mean, Log Cabin Road is a good road to get out to Route 1 and go towards.
So I would say yes to Log Cabin Road, but I couldn't get off of Goose Rocks Road to make a left turn at 2:30 in the afternoon today on Log Cabin. So I was like shocked because I'm like, wait a minute, where are all these people coming from?
Off of Goose Rocks to go left.
Left to come down into town, yeah.
Where's the town line with Arundel?
It's on the opposite side of the road.
So
Rundle
on,
is the road.
yeah.
Rundle's on the opposite side.
So if you go, if you,
On Log
if
Cabin.
you come down from like the Trolley Museum and you're
Yeah.
coming down Log Cabin now, on the right-hand side is Arundel. So right past Goose Rocks, there's a housing development. It looks like to be, one-floor living, so maybe 55 plus. And there's a couple farmhouses, and then you get
In
to.
Arundel.
On Arundel side.
Yeah.
And then you get to two farmhouses later, you get to where they're putting in large market-based housing development back there. And then you go past one more farmhouse, and there's an open field with red stakes up, so there's, so that's, so the point also is that our town is not, is intertwined with a couple other towns.
Yeah. Yep.
And they come into our town too, right? Or through our town. So I understand that. So I'll look back at the comprehensive plan of what you guys talked about around traffic and stuff, or,
If I'm not mistaken, actually.
But I think,
All of Log Cabin.
but I think
Road
the-
is Arundel. Both sides of the road. The homes aren't, but the actual road itself
Yeah.
is within
Yeah,
Arundel.
yeah.
Both
Yeah.
sides.
Can we see that?
Which is a state road, actually. That's a state road.
What if I stole that? She has to see.
but the reality is, we have much more traffic than we had 10 or 15 years ago. When I moved up here 15, 14 years ago, from Labor Day to Memorial Day, there was no traffic. You could go anywhere. The turnpike was empty. The Route 1 was empty. It was, a true blessing. And, there isn't regional planning really in terms of traffic. And Galen, you may disagree with me, but I've watched planning board meetings for decades, and I've never seen a consultant say there would be any impact by any project ever proposed by a developer or it's the numbers always work, and yet, we have what we have today.
Close
So,
the border to
Meredith, I share-
Massachusetts.
What's that?
I'm joking. I said close the border to Massachusetts. Does that, so to answer Paul's question, I mean, is that something that, the regional boards ever bring up and talk about? Just out of curiosity.
Regarding just traffic,
Yeah.
just traffic planning? I mean,
Yeah,
there's-
and convey, information, trickle it down to towns and just say, this is the pulse of what we see and maybe not necessarily recommendations, but, some insight on how to help or improve things, if your town is seeing a high volume of traffic. Is there any regional?
Yeah, again, SMPDC does regularly meet with the different towns regarding transportation planning efforts. So that's something that's underway. And there are also, in the comprehensive plan, it does mention about, they did do safety studies to make sure, okay, where are our collisions at, where are our issues at? And certainly I can talk to the departments about their response times if traffic's ever been an issue. Especially, I think during your peak times of the summer months would be what the concern is. But again, we don't really have those state arterial roads that run through Kennebunkport. We're a little bit of an oddity. We're not on that main thoroughfare of where people want to go from here to there. We're sort of, I'd say, off the beaten path a little bit. I think we'd like to keep it that way. And I don't see the state bringing a highway or anything down to this
No,
part,
don't
so
want 'em.
that's, we like to keep it that way.
We'll get a tunnel.
Right. No.
So we're closing in on the end of our shift.
Yep.
I didn't think we were gonna go to this long, so it's good discussion.
Yeah.
Any other
Good
topics
conversation.
need to be
Well,
brought up?
So are we gonna recommend or put something to the select board about?
Do you want an actual motion, you think?
I thought you wanted it to go back the other way.
No, so that your memo's already sent to them. They have to let us know the priorities of what they
Okay.
want to do.
Okay,
In the meantime, I can do this little recommendation until we get word back from them.
Okay.
Yep.
okay.
All right. We'll see what they say.
Yep.
We could be working on something totally different than what we discussed tonight. All right.
Galen, thanks a lot for that work on the maps and showing us the different areas.
Yeah,
That's very helpful.
my apologies for that. I'll send over the PDFs, that way you have the
No,
breakdown.
no, we got some good information though tonight, so thank you.
So what are we gonna be doing next meeting, and when was that again?
To be determined.
Okay.
Based off the Board of Selectmen's feedback. If you look at that calendar I sent you, the tentative draft calendar, you would have to start bringing in, experts at your next meeting to discuss stormwater, if you wanted to bring people in to explain stormwater management, how we would manage it, that sort of thing.
So that would be on the 16th? Is that kind of,
That was the tentative.
okay. Which realistically, do you think that can be put together in a 2-week short notice, or?
I'm sure we can get you some people to come and talk about stormwater just in general. That way you guys have a good concept of, how you'd manage it, what low-impact development looks like, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
I'm sure we can talk to some
Yeah.
people.
And they know our 2-hour,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, so we
Hey,
should-
Galen, when did you send that?
When did I send that? That was before Easter.
Okay, I was away. I must have missed it. I'll look.
In other news, this is under other business. I just wanted to let you know that I talked to the town clerk. She is sending the town warrant to the Board of Selectmen for their next meeting. I think it's next week. At that meeting, they're going to authorize the warrant. Once that's done, they're going to schedule a public hearing for both the floodplain map and LD 2003. So you're being invited to listen in on the public hearing portion of that meeting. I think it's a requirement of our statute, so we have to follow that. So I just want to mark your calendars. It's going to be on May 9th, which is the Board of Selectmen on a Thursday at 6 o'clock. So we'd appreciate your attendance there. And if you can't attend in person, virtually is fine.
So these meetings are recorded too. Are these meetings recorded?
they are.
Okay, because I just want to make sure, like, if the word gets out and people want to hear the folks that are going to come,
Yeah.
but they won't be present during the meeting, that they have the opportunity to listen to it
Yeah, the link's
after.
on the Zoom,
Okay.
on the agenda. That has the Zoom link that people can listen in.
Okay.
They just won't be a panelist.
What
Yeah.
time on the 9th?
May 9th at 6 p.m. right here.
I think
It's a Thursday.
California. Graduation.
Oh.
College, finally.
Yeah.
Yep. 3 more to go for that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I just want to put that on your
Paul,
calendar.
take a motion.
Oh,
Yep, you're good.
Oh, I make a motion, we adjourn.
I'll second it.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
All right.
Right.
Thank you.
Aye.